karanasan mo po, tingnan ba nakasalanan natin dito?
Media educators are warning call to defend press freedom.
This corruption in media will contribute to
With the recent pork barrel scam and the Million People March held last August at the Luneta Park, the clamor for the passing of the Freedom of Information Bill is stronger than ever. Proponents of the FOI bill believe that the law will be a major deterrent that will help curb the corrupt practices within the government. Recently, the Senate held a hearing on the FOI bill headed by newly elected Senator Grace Poe, reminding everyone present that the support and call for the passing of the FOI bill has reached its tipping point.
Marami ng bansa ang may FOI, 90+ countries na. Sabi nga ni Senator Angara na nauna na tayo sa demokrasya, pero hanggang ngayon wala pa rin tayong FOI.
Senator Sani Angara stressed that in the current atmosphere, the passing of the bill during the 16th Congress is more important than ever, adding that the president's slogan of "Kung walang korap, walang mahirap" will be realized with the passing of the FOI bill. Good evening. You are watching News Cafe on the Solar News Channel. Sitting in for Jing Magsaysay, I am Amelin Veloso. Joining me today is Attorney Nepomuceno Malaluan, lead convener of Right to Know, Right Now Coalition. Good evening and thank you for joining us, Attorney Nepo.
Yes, good evening, Amelin.
So let's start first with what is the status now of the FOI bill? There have been many versions in the House of Representatives, in the Senate, and even Malacanang has a version on the FOI Act. So what are we looking at now? Have all these provisions that were variables at that time finally better defined now?
Well, because it was not able to pass in the last Congress, we have to start from the very beginning of the legislative process for the 16th Congress. In other words, the bills will have to be refiled, referred to a committee, and go through the committee process before it goes to plenary for approval on second and third reading, and then bicameral conference. So we have to start the process
From the very beginning?
From the very
when
beginning.
When it was the original draft or the original bill?
Well, the bills.
Or with the changes
right
already?
now in the Senate, there are 9 bills filed in the Senate. In the House, we are still checking how many finally have been filed. But it's good that the chairman, Senator, already began the committee hearings. And there's a commitment to already finish it as soon as possible. I think in caucus, Senator Frank Drilon, as reported, has agreed to make this among its priorities. And really, that's possible because we're not really starting from scratch with respect to these bills. Most of these bills already embody the long, very, very long legislative history on these bills. Kahit even if there are 9 bills that they are considering, these are mostly already very close to one another.
They've already incorporated their arguments before.
Yes.
Or are there still contentious issues that are still being addressed, or have the congressmen or the senators, have they already incorporated the changes that Malacanang preferred to include?
Yes, the Senate, as early as the 15th Congress, and I think that that will be the case now, has already incorporated many of the proposals of the proposed amendments of Malacanang in order to address the concerns of the bureaucracy and the president. But I would like to point out also that those amendments that they proposed also had the inputs from advocates in terms of balancing those concerns with the concern over protecting the people's right to information. And yesterday in the hearing, I enumerated several key amendments that were already adopted in relation to Malacanang's proposals. And these are already embodied in almost all of the bills that have been filed. So, in other words, as far as the Senate is concerned, if there are amendments, this might be very fine-tuning that might have to be done. In the House, it might be a different case.
Yeah, sabi nga daw ang labanan ay nasa Kongreso. I mean, I remember that there's also an issue on the right to reply, which should be included in the FOI bill, or it should be either a separate, that they both will be filed. Okay, for those who have yet to refresh, on the right to reply, this is the, if for example a media entity would like to write about an official, the official has an opportunity to give their side of the story, and they have to have equal airtime or equal space.
Yes.
And then,
And
is
within
this,
a
do you see this
particular
as,
time
do you see this as the obstacle? Because if you mentioned that all the contentious issues more or less have been defined already, or we've already reached a compromise, do you think that's the one that's making it a bit difficult?
Well, at the House, that is what is on the surface. But I think the resistance to the FOI really runs deeper than a law like a right of reply. We have always regarded it in its pure sense really a killer provision or a killer law to the FOI bill. If you would note, there is no independent push for right of reply, really. It's always raised whenever the FOI bill moves. So our sense is that it's really in a way, in a word, really a killer, a poison pill, if you might put it, so that the end objective really is for the FOI bill not to go through. And but it is very difficult to speculate fully the source of that resistance. But I think it will have to be associated with the members of Congress have very strong links with local governments, and we've seen now these issues that's gripping the country on PDAF. Many of these are based on what you might say paper trail of official documents, and these are exactly the kinds of information that will become easily available to citizens
If the FOI bill
if
is
the
passed.
FOI bill is passed.
But some are saying that there are perceptions that the FOI bill is largely for the media or for watchdogs. How can it benefit the general public, and why can it benefit, and how can it benefit?
Well, to the extent that the media is a very big user of official information for purposes of news, of news work, then certainly the media also will be able to make use of the FOI law. But as you know, media can also be very enterprising, that even without an FOI law, they can get information. It's really intended for ordinary citizens, whether they are non-government organizations or even individual citizens, because this is applicable to all levels of government, up to the barangay level, all agencies of government. What this enables the citizen to do is that when they request for a certain document, record of information, then it goes through a very
A simpler
standard
process, a standard
rule,
procedure,
standard procedure, as you mentioned. The time now it's very easy to give you the runaround when you make
Because
a
there's
request.
no standard
There's
on how long they should release to you
Yes.
in information. But what kind
That's
of
the fir-
information can you get?
Well, just to finish that, the procedure is just one, but there's another, the scope of what is available to you.
Yes.
They can always say, well, it's
Hindi
confidential,
pwede.
yes.
So
but
with the
without
bill-
a basis. Now, when they say, hindi pwede, then they must be able to cite a specific provision in the exceptions to say that the information you're asking is covered. If you're asking for, let's say, for example, the approval document for or the document where a bogus NGO in the PDAF case was
You can-
accredited. If you ask for that accreditation document and wants to know who signed it, before they can say, well, it's confidential. Now they have to say, well, it will damage the national security or the national defense. It becomes harder. They have to point out that the document really falls under any such exception.
What are these exemptions? And the DOJ, the DND, and Malacanang in yesterday's hearing pointed out that there are information that should not be made public in matters of national interest,
Yes,
national
that's correct.
security, defense, foreign relations. What other documents can we not get?
Well, before the specifics, I think it's the framework for the exceptions. The idea is that it is in the interest of the public that they are able to access documents to know what government is doing with the authority and the resources that we entrust to them. It's a form of citizen accountability mechanism. But at the same time, in the public interest also, there are certain classes of information that when you make accessible to the broad sections of the public, it could also produce damage to the very public interest that you want to uphold. In this case, for example, among those that are listed are, as mentioned, national security, national defense, and foreign affairs, foreign relations. But it has to be related. It's not just the class of documents. In other words, not just because you can categorize it as a national security, national defense, or foreign affairs matter, it is automatically exempted. You have to relate it with a damage to a public interest if it is disclosed. For example, in foreign affairs, the document, if disclosed, must damage the Philippine negotiating position.
Who
for
determines
example.
that? The agency or
The agency is the first
department?
one that will determine that. But there are classes of documents that allows for, because of the very sensitive nature, allows for pre-classification by the chief executive, and that's provided for, and that's for national security. And then I don't know if you heard about the concern of the president over his deliberative process, free and frank exchange of
cabinet
his
members.
closest advisors, because
during executive session, is this the one?
well, whether or not it is in executive session.
Na parang they fear that maybe because of this, cabinet members or those in attendance may not be forthright, or they might not be as candid because they have this fear that what they will be saying will be published.
Yeah, well, on the first point, ano kaya yung sasabihin na yun that they cannot tell
But
the
it
public?
does. But it does make you a bit. You will have fears though
Yes.
if you know that you're
Yes,
recorded.
precisely.
Oo.
And in recognition of the president making decisions at the highest level and must have access to the most frank and candid opinion and advice from his closest advisors, that is precisely why it was recognized as an exception. It's a distinct exception that was inserted and proposed by Malacanang and agreed to by stakeholders.
So now it doesn't necessarily have to be released.
Yes, it doesn't necessarily have to be released. But the president has to invoke it as privileged.
Okay.
That's one. But we're still trying to push that there be a certain time period within which
Because they will come up with a final paper anyway, a final policy.
Yes, but there might be still some interest in the confidentiality, because even if you say the decision has already been done, you would say that, well, if in the future, if anyway after it's done, my advice will already be made public, then you would say that you would also withhold a certain advice. So there's still a public interest in extending the confidentiality even after the decision has been made, but not forever, because if it's for historical purposes already, all the personalities are probably already dead or something, or it won't affect anymore. I mean, it's
Maybe
lost its
released at a
memory
certain
or
time.
whatever. So we're also asking for some period of time within which this information might be made accessible.
Okay. We still have a lot to discuss with our guests. News Cafe will return after these reminders. You are still watching News Cafe on the Solar News Channel, and we are still joined by our guest, Attorney Nepomuceno Malaluan of the Right to Know Right Now. So, Attorney Nepo, in the absence of an FOI law, our Constitution explicitly states that we as Filipinos have the right to this information, records of official acts, documents, research. So why would we still need an FOI law? Don't we have enough laws already that maybe this might be redundant? And then wouldn't the problem be really in the implementation, or maybe just the lack of information or awareness?
Well, first, that is correct that the right to information is a distinct guarantee under the Bill of Rights. It has the same footing as the freedom of the press, freedom of expression, and so on. And the Supreme Court has already said that this right is enforceable even without need of legislation. But in its implementation, what we see is that it needs to have further elaboration through a particular law. And as we mentioned earlier, first of that is the clarification of the exact scope, because without that, there's
What
a
can
big
be
room
released?
of discretion. Yes, you have a right, but
What
which
are your
documents?
limitations and
are the
what can you
limitations?
get?
And it will also help the people in the government agencies, because they also don't know, can this be released or not? And what happens is that each case-by-case basis, if they withhold it, then you have to go to the court to adjudicate whether it will be covered. And once you go to that route, you know that a Supreme Court case, for example, can reach a minimum of 3 years for your information. I mean,
longer.
forget it. Many of the cases that have been filed in the Supreme Court were mainly to set precedents rather than to actually get the information within a specific time. As a news person, you know that getting information has a time element.
Yes. And then sometimes they give you a runaround, and there are even those who are saying na depende na sa custodian.
And then it becomes smooth. But that's the other side of that in terms of defining the scope. Is the procedure. There's no uniform procedure across government agencies. Even if they could adopt it administratively, for example, the executive, but that can change with the next administration. Secondly, if the executive adopts it, that will not apply to the Supreme Court, that will not apply to the Congress, that will not apply to the independent constitution. So we want to have a standard, uniform, predictable procedure for accessing information. And the third one, that is a legislative power itself, is the definition of sanctions. You cannot just sanction anybody without for violating a right to information without defining how what is the sanctionable
for,
act,
and what is the
sanction
punishment
for it, for the punishment for it. So without that, it's easy, because even if the court in the future finds that I should give it, then I will give it, but you lost already the time element, as I mentioned. So the sanctions is both for accountability as well as a deterrent for government personnel to release the information, as a matter of course, unless they can clearly show that it falls under any one of the exceptions.
Now, the PDAF issue is what has been hugging the headlines for the past weeks. Will it solve that? Will the existence of an FOI law prevent the possible misuse of funds?
Well, solving is a tough. As I've seen people say, it's not. FOI is not the magic bullet, but it's a very potent tool, and not just potent, but it has a certain character. If you look at this PDAF scam, the focus has been on a personality, Napoles, who is allegedly involved in the creation of NGOs that were used to defraud the government, and supposedly the legislators who identified these projects. But you have to look at the whole PDAF. It's not it's not an exclusively legislative matter. The safeguards of government applies to PDAF. For example, the oversight over the release of funds is DBM. DBM is the one that releases the so-called SARO and cash allocations. and then it is coursed through a line agency, which also has oversight function, because the PDAF, once it is identified, has to fall under a certain agency for its implementation. When it is implemented, PDAF is not exempt from the procurement law. So they should also adhere to the standards of the Procurement Act. And after they've spent it, it is not exempt as well from regular audit by COA. Now we had a special audit, but it must have been audited before. As you can see, there must have been, for a leakage as big as that, there must have been a breakdown in somewhere in that long list of safeguards that are centered on government institutions. And that's why a citizen mechanism is very important. And for us to be able to play that role, it is important that there is some certainty with accessing information. The government says, just a point on that, that they're transparent anyway. You can see but even if you look at this PDAF again, you will not see all of this by just looking from the website. You will have to go through source documents, and these are not available.
But if the FOI law was already in existence, it would be easier for us to get this information from the COA, like their audit report.
Well, not just the COA, because the source documents are with the DBM, with the
paper
line
trail,
agency.
so to speak.
Yes, the paper trail, so to speak. The memorandum of agreements that's talked about, these are not posted anywhere. What's posted there are names, amounts, and probably these are aggregate data. They provide useful leads. But if you want to get to the bottom of this, then you will have to go through the source document. And that's the request-based access that the FOI bill addresses.
Does the FOI bill have safeguards or provisions to ensure that whatever data or information that is being released must not be misused?
With respect to safeguards, the exceptions itself are safeguards. That's the first. In other words, those that require protection are already protected under this law. And there's a provision that states that in the use of all our rights, we have to do it in good faith, etc. And if there's damage that's done, then they can have recourse through damages. But that's what they want. They want also for them to be able to have a right of reply, as I mentioned. And that's the argument that they make.
What do you think? Do you think in the 16th Congress the bill will finally be passed into law, or do you still foresee obstacles to this?
Oh, of course there are obstacles. You cannot imagine how, for those who want to stop this bill, and because many of them are the holders of the authority to decide on the matter, then it's really difficult. It's an uphill battle. But what the Senate does now, if it is able to pass this as soon as it can, there's a sense that it is possible to pass it within the year. That's the earliest ever that one chamber will be able to pass it, and that will allow us, all of us, to focus on the House, and probably also this matter of the PDAF, well, to put it bluntly, scam, has provided also an opportunity to see the urgency of this bill. So there might be a window, but having been in this advocacy for a decade now, it's I wouldn't bet on it. We go by benchmarks. In other words, if we see it moving, if we see the kinds of forces lending support for this bill, which includes the executive also, and which, by the way, has not given it the kind of support that it has done, for example, with sin tax, with RH, with cabotage law in the last SONA. The forces are not still. The confluence of the different ingredients are not yet there.
But will you go the way of the anti-pork supporters, those who rally for its abolition? They will be forming again another prayer rally or another another meeting, would you do the same? Would you ask the help of netizens, or will you try to gather the public support?
At a certain crucial point, we might have to do that. For example, if it becomes very clear that, again, that assuming the Senate has passed it, and it's really the House, and it really requires the support of the leadership of the House, of the Speaker, of the Majority Leader, and it is very obvious that, for example, if it becomes very obvious that there is intent again to kill this bill for a third time, then we might have to think of better ways to put pressure on the House leadership. The House leadership's position will be very critical, and so far, it's not looking very good.
So you're not very confident that it might push through, or it might be passed into law, the 16th Congress?
Well, as I mentioned, we will go by benchmark. What I'm saying is that we already have a first hurdle, which is to get the House committee to move in the same way that the Senate has moved. So it will require some pressure. And you know how difficult it is also for an advocacy. I mean, we're not a resource-rich advocacy. Many of those who help us are also on volunteer, on concerned citizens that are available today, probably not tomorrow. It's difficult. Whereas for those who are in power, that's their job. But while that is their job, it is also within their power to withhold it. So it's just a matter of choice for some of them.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time, Attorney Nepo, for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you also.
Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. I would like to thank my guest, Attorney Nepomuceno Malaluan, for being with us tonight. Join us again next Thursday for another round of discussion right here on News Cafe. Sitting in for Jing Magsaysay, I'm Amelin Veloso. Good night.